Ladies and gentlemen, this RedGamingTech.com video. I'm here to tell you how to produce a very cheap gaming system. This is going to cost you around $600 or around the £500 mark. Obviously, give or take a few pennies here and there, and depends obviously on shipping and so on. So what we're basically going to be doing is using Intel and AMD together, and this will produce a very good overclockable system that should be pretty much good to go for quite a while actually. And the great thing about this is it's quite customizable in terms of budget as well. So first thing we're going to have to do, of course, is select the actual CPU. Now, I mentioned in my CPU buying guide this month that there are a couple of options. Probably the best, however, will be the i5, and this, of course, would be the Ivy Bridge. Now, the 335P, I'll say that again, that's the Intel Core i5 335P Ivy Bridge, is pretty darn good. It's extremely overclockable, it runs pretty much with very little power, has a decent level to cache, and so on. I'm not going to go into the whole thing. More importantly, it's quad core and overclocks like an actual demon. Now, what about the CPU cooler? Now, you've got a couple of options here. If you're very limited on budget, you can just go ahead and use the default retail CPU cooler. Now, you're not going to be able to clock it as high, but to be honest with you, it'll probably do mostly for gaming for now. And more to the point, you can always put in a different CPU cooler later on. So if you're trying to build on a very tight budget, skip the CPU cooler, just go with the retail one. You'll be absolutely fine with a limited overclock. Now, what about the more important choice of a motherboard? I say more important because it's a lot more difficult. Now, there are a couple of options here. The ASRock Z75 Pro 3 is pretty darn nice, and for the feature set that you're going to be getting, it's a very solid board. It overclocks very well. It has a good selection of different BIOS features and so on. It just makes sense. Now, RAM is a lot trickier. There are a couple of options. You can either go with 4 or 8 gigs. Now, the problem with RAM right now is the price has shot up a little bit. Not massively so, but it is a bit more expensive than what it was. So you could go with basically any kind of RAM set you want. You can go with really cheap stuff. For example, I'm looking at one website. I'm not going to give the name because, as you guys know, I don't like to kind of play favourites or whatever. But I'm looking at one set of RAM in the UK for around £26. That's 4 gigs, and that would be 1600 megahertz. So not the fastest stuff, but not too bad either. You could get faster, or you could try and go for 8 gigabytes, or you could just stick in another 4 gigs later on. That's totally up to you, of course. What about the more important aspect of the graphics card? I say more important because most people really heavily associate the graphics card with gaming, and of course it is very dependent on gaming. To be honest with you, I wouldn't really look at NVIDIA here. That's not to say they don't have excellent graphics cards. Now, there are second-hand options available, but one of the better graphics cards to probably go with would be the Radeon. The Radeon HD 7850 has really good performance. Now, as I like to say, you're given a couple of options here as well. This is where it becomes a little bit trickier. Now, for around 138 British pounds, or what is that in dollars? I did have a thing up. Where did I put it? Yeah, around 160 to 170 American dollars. You'll be able to get an AMD 7850, that's 1 gigabyte AMD Radeon graphics card, and that comes with a couple of games as well, at least in the UK. I don't know about the US. Regardless, you can upgrade that to 2 gigabytes, which is good if possible, because obviously more graphics memory is only a fantastic thing if possible to do. I don't know why I'm speaking like this, I'm a bit tired. Regardless, 2 gigs is absolutely fantastic. Of course, this is PCIE and comes with all the stuff that you'd expect, DX11 and blah blah blah. It's a very good graphics card for the money, quite honestly. NVIDIA do have some excellent cards in their range, and I typically slightly prefer NVIDIA for one reason. Well, there's a couple of reasons. One, I really like physics. I know it doesn't apply to all games, and the other reason is CUDA, which really benefits me with some creative programs. Although, to be fair, AMD graphics cards have improved massively on that in recent revisions. Regardless, I personally think that's probably about the best value for money for the cache that you've actually got on that kind of budget. So go ahead and get that. Get the 2 gigabytes if you can stretch a little bit. But I'd suggest you do some googling to see what the games are like on the resolution you're going to be playing with, as well as the games that you're going to be using. Now there are a couple of options remaining. One would be the hard drive, of course, the case, the DVD drive, and so on. Now, depending how old and crappy your current hard drive is, and of course DVD writer or what have you, then you might be able to reuse them, at least as secondary drives. I'd recommend, if not, to get kind of any decent Seagate type of drive, a Barracuda for example. You can get one 500 gigabytes plus, make sure it's 7200 RPM, and make sure it's SATA, of course. You get the general idea by now. Just kind of have a look around. There are a couple of drives available in that kind of price range. Once again, you're looking at about $60 if you have to go ahead and buy one, or about £50. It's not too bad at all. I don't really think I need to kind of really heavily go into the hard drive situation, as there are so many different configurations out there and you might have one spare and so on. As for drives, in terms of DVD writer, anything will do, as long as it's SATA and it's got a reasonably good review behind it. Personally speaking, I'd go for the 24-speed SATA model. Why SATA? Just because really it's better for airflow in terms of the cables are a lot smaller. Just makes more sense. As for the pricing on these are basically free. You're looking at about 13 to 16, and that would be dollars or pounds, so they're basically very cheap. Cases, very much subjective. I don't really want to recommend one, but you're looking at about 30 to 40 either pounds or dollars for a case. The reality is, I say the cases are very subjective in how they look, and some people love Windows, some people hate Windows, some people really value how quiet they are, other people don't care, so on. I just personally say have a look around, make sure that the case looks reasonable to you. I mean, if it's under the desk, it doesn't really matter anyway, so just go with one that looks good. There are a couple of examples, but Antec, various other manufacturers are pretty good. Probably the most important aspect of all of this, since we're on a budget, is the PSU. I'll say the most important because obviously you can have some really bad horror stories with PSUs, and obviously they can blow up and so on if they're not, decent makes and so forth. As for what type of wattage you're going to need for this, more is always better. Now obviously if you've already happened to have access to a really good PSU, you could probably reuse it, assuming it has all the relevant connections and so on. If however your current PSU is a bit long in the tooth, or you're not confident on the connections on it, or what have you, or maybe really bad rails, I'd recommend something like Corsair. Antec is pretty good. I've heard good things about the Antec Neo Eco, I think it's called. I don't have notes on me with that one. But as for the wattage, you're going to be looking at around 400 or 500 watts at minimum. Personally speaking, I always like to go for more, because generally speaking, if you can have more, then obviously you're going to be much better off. Now, what about overclocking, as I really want to briefly touch on that. Overclocking is going to be a bit trickier, because as I've said previously, you're going to be looking at a default cooler, you're not going to be looking at anything special. As I said, I personally would be very careful with overclocking. Look at some guides to see what the respectable voltages are for your particular hardware, and don't try to push it too high. Be very mindful of the fact you've got a very basic cooler on there. So that will pretty much get you out of any trouble you've got right now if you're on a very limited budget. And at some point or another in the next couple of, weeks, or whenever I can really, I'll put out another one of these, because you'll be surprised how many messages I get. Hey, I'm on a very low budget and I'm not really sure what to do. So there you go. As I said, if you can save some money from some of the other bits and bobs, I'd personally recommend to either slightly bump up the graphics card or to get more memory. Definitely more memory would be very good, and a better cooler. So obviously that depends on the hard drive situation. So yeah, I think that just about does it for me. Hopefully you found the video somewhat helpful, and I will see you soon. Take care of yourselves, and bye for now.